Hello, I'm here with Breen Ouellette, who's running for City Council with COPE. Good morning, Breen.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Breen. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a lawyer, and I was a lawyer on the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. I've run in 2 federal elections before Jean Swanson finally convinced me to run in the civic election. She's been working on me since 2019. That's a story in itself. I'm also I'm Métis, originally from Saskatchewan. I've lived in Vancouver since September 2014, and I've been married 21 years, and I've got a 9-month-old son. And before anybody makes the comment that I must have gotten married when I was 10 years old, I am 45 years old. Actually, it's a little late to start having kids. I feel like I don't have the same kind of energy my friends had back when they were having children at a younger age. And I got into politics because of the work at the National Inquiry and the things that I saw happening inside bureaucracies across this country. It worried me that a lot of things were happening that elected politicians seemed to be unaware of. And so I wanted to be a voice that was calling for systemic change alongside policy change.
So I've been following your political career with great interest, and I'm curious so you partially answered my question. So Jean Swanson got you, but what do you hope to accomplish at the municipal level?
A lot of things. The one that always gets talked about, so let's get that out of the way first. It's being able to afford living in this city as a renter for a lot of people. It's getting so bad that, I'm a lawyer. People that are generally considered to be, free of risk from eviction, that kind of things, are starting to feel the pressure in Vancouver. I know from personal experience, I had a house fire in 2016, and if things had just been a little off, a little different when that house fire happened, my wife and I may not have been able to weather through it and get back into housing. We might have been living out of our vehicle. It's just the wrong set of circumstances coming together at the right time can put people at huge risk. And I've learned from Jean, she's a great mentor, that I've learned from Jean that the city's been told by private developers that they just won't build anything that's aimed at people who earn less than $75,000 a year. And that's the case for decades now. And so we've got this gap that wasn't addressed, and the housing for people who earn less than $75,000 a year, that gap's been growing. It's been getting worse, and we really need to address it. So rent protections coupled with addressing the gap for building affordable and social housing is key. And Jean came really close to addressing that revenue issue. A lot of people say that the city can't do anything, that they need help from the feds or the province to pay for it. But Jean's mansion tax would have gone an incredibly long way to generate the revenue. And another reason that I'm involved, I live pretty close to the downtown east side. I'm down by Science World, and I go into Chinatown a lot, and into the downtown east side from time to time. I see a lot of posters for women who've gone missing. We read about women who've been murdered and they're found weeks and months later. it, I mean, it shouldn't still be happening after this national inquiry that we had, that I served on. And I did some really great work for the city of Saskatoon that resulted in some really a revolutionary new position being created at that city. And Jean called me 2 days after I found out that it had been implemented, and she said, and she called me and she said, I'm going to leave out the expletive, but she said, Breen, I know I call you every 6 to 8 months and ask you to run. Will you just please run? And I said, Jean, you got me at the right time. I told her about the independent representative for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, and how she'd protect women from having their children taken by foster care, and how she'd protect women who were at risk of being evicted and becoming homeless, and how she would act as an investigator into the city itself, that she'd have the power to investigate any city department. And if she found that that city was systemically contributing to harms against Indigenous women, girls, or Two-Spirit people, she could write a public report and deliver it directly to City Council. It would be available to the public. Everybody would be able to see what she found in her investigation, what her recommendations are. And then it's up to City Council to do the work. You know, they have everything they need. They just have to actually exercise the political will. And if they choose not to, then that's on City Council. So I told Jean all that. I said, if you promise me that we're going to add that to COPE's policy for the election, then I'm going to run for COPE. And you know, it's part of our policy. We're trying to make Vancouver the first city to implement the independent representative of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, because I think we'll be able to get it done faster in Saskatoon if we get on it.
So, okay, let's talk about reconciliation. And for me, as an immigrant to Canada, I've had this feeling that so far reconciliation has meant for the previous councils, it's just meant renaming places.
Hmm.
I feel that's inadequate.
Hmm.
And what's your take on that?
Well, you know, my take, because I want to bring a representative for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people to City Council, is this is a real step toward how we approach reconciliation, where we put an Indigenous woman or Two-Spirit person in a position of unimpeachable authority. And she has the ability to conduct those investigations in the city. She has the ability to appear in court as a witness or an intervener to help stop this tide of Indigenous children that are being taken into foster care. That's real reconciliation. That's saying we don't just want to, as you say, change the names of places or put up, you know, beautiful art and culture, which is very important. I mean, art and culture is at the heart of so much in Indigenous nations. You know, I don't want to downplay that, but we also need to make this space for people to say what needs to be said without worrying about losing their jobs or worrying about being reelected. And that's what an independent appointed officer of the city would be. The other thing that we have to be really careful of, you know, slipping into lawyer mode for a second, we have to be really careful about what reconciliation means to us as individuals versus what it means to the colonial courts and the federal government and the provincial government. They define reconciliation legalistically in a Supreme Court of Canada decision called HIDA, which was released in 2004. And it you know, I was reading it the first time and I got very hopeful because it recognizes that Canada only has de facto control of the land. And de facto is a legal term, which means, you know, factual, as opposed to legal. De jure would mean legal control of the land. So when the Supreme Court said Canada has de facto control of the land, lights were going off in my head the first time I read the decision. I was like, they get it. They actually get it. They don't have legal control. There was no bill of sale. There was no transfer of title. It was an occupation and taking. And then they go on to say that Indigenous nations were here first. And I'm like, they get it. This is so great. This is so great. And then you get a little farther into the decision and they say reconciliation is recognizing that Canada controls the land in fact and bringing Indigenous people on side so that that control becomes legal. That's not the reconciliation that I understand as the common meaning of the word. It's essentially a reframing of what assimilation is. It's relying on this very old, you could almost call it ancient now, this ancient idea that was established by the Pope in 1493 when he issued the papal donations that said that Spain and Portugal had ultimate legal title to the lands of Indigenous peoples all around the world. And the Pope was saying that these lands weren't occupied by people because Indigenous people weren't Christians. And so they weren't afforded the legal rights. And even though that was issued way back in 1493, it was only a few years later that Francisco de Vitoria, a noted legal scholar, a jurist of the Catholic Church, and now considered one of the founders of international law, he gave lectures saying that the Pope was wrong. He told monarchs across Europe that it was illegal for them to go to the Americas and take land from Indigenous people, that they had a legal right. And whenever people say that, oh, it was a long time ago, people thought differently and they kind of wave their hands and try to wave it away. No, at every single stage, going back all the way to the early 1500s, people were saying, you can't do this, this is wrong. But people in power with greed, they wanted to take the land and they did. So remember that reconciliation has two meanings. It has a legal meaning in Canada, which is very different than the meaning we understand. And we have to always be conscious of that, because every time the province and the feds are talking about reconciliation, you can see it if you're looking closely at how they're implementing it. It is all about trying to assimilate Indigenous people under the authority of Canada. It's always about making us subordinate to Canadian law. There's no actual recognition that Indigenous people have a sovereign right to govern the land. There's none of that. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And thank you for explaining that to me. As an immigrant, that's always been a struggle, because I think we've talked about this before, even on the guide to the citizenship test. I believe it's deeply flawed, but that's for another day. So I read through your platform, and one of your key priorities is renter protection. I'm a renter, so yeah, I really want to know what you plan to do.
Well, one of the first things we want to do, all this assumes we get the right split on council. But one of the first things we want to do is we want to look at the vacancy control that the city implemented through basically business licenses of landlords in the downtown east side SROs. And we want to extend that vacancy control over all the rental units in Vancouver. About 70,000 rental units we're talking about. And so what vacancy control is, in basic terms, it's the idea that when someone moves out of a unit, the landlord is restricted on how much they can increase the rent for the next person that moves in. Because right now what we're seeing is that real estate income trusts are coming into Vancouver. They're buying up entire apartment blocks. They're making it extremely difficult for people to live in their units. People have been living there in some cases 20 years or more. They're basically trying to get people to move out. It's a renovation a lot of times, or it's just not doing any maintenance and everything's getting dirty and the washing machines are broken and nothing's working. And as soon as they get people out, in a press conference that we did a couple of weeks ago with Global and CTV and others, we invited renters that we've been talking to, and they were telling us, one person, she was evicted, rent evicted essentially, and when she checked back with friends that were still in the building, the rent that she had paid was $1,800. The new tenants were paying $3,600. Somebody else talked about living in a suite for $2,000, and when he finally was fed up and moved, he found out that it was being rented for $5,000 a month. So, and if you go to these real estate income trust websites and you read their plan, like their plan is like right there on the front page. It's like, we will maximize rents and minimize costs to ensure the maximum return to investors. So they've taken a human right, housing is a human right, and they are aggressively monetizing it. So a vacancy control will prevent all of that from happening. It will restrict how much they can increase the rent between tenants. It will essentially tie rent control to the unit instead of to the person in the unit. It's a huge loophole in provincial rent control. Now, that said, a couple of landlords have been fighting it in the court. They've won the first battle at the Supreme Court level, but the city is appealing. And I believe the appeal has a very strong chance of winning, because the judge at the Supreme Court level essentially said that Vancouver's charter is different than the community charter that governs all the other municipalities in BC. And she said that because of differences in the wording, she interpreted the reason for Vancouver's charter being different was that the province intended to, or not intended, intends to restrict the powers of Vancouver compared to every other city in the province. And to me, that's just completely ridiculous. We are the largest city in the province with the most complex issues. If anything, the province would intend for us to have additional powers over the other cities so that we could address these really serious issues that we have. So, the appellate court will be 3 judges hearing the appeal. There'll be judges who are more experienced, have a wider diversity of practice as lawyers before becoming judges. So I'm very confident that the appeal is going to go well. And if it doesn't, we'll still be able to address it by going back to the province and saying, they're saying you have this intent. Maybe you should just amend the Vancouver Charter so we can make that crystal clear that you don't intend to tie our hands behind our backs and throw us in the river. So that's rent control is huge. But the other thing that I really like about our platform is we want to pass a bylaw to legitimize tenant unions in Vancouver as collective bargaining agents for the buildings that they represent. Because there's a huge imbalance of power between one tenant and a landlord, especially a landlord of a larger building or a corporate landlord that owns multiple buildings. And so by legitimizing tenant unions as a bargaining agent, you'll be bringing the collective power of all the tenants, and you'll be bringing the collective ability to take it to litigation if necessary. It won't be resting on one person's shoulder. And we'll hopefully be able to start turning the provincial arbitration process toward more fairness, because I've been hearing from a lot of people that they go to the RTB when they have a dispute with their landlord, and RTB arbitrators are making, one person told me that the arbitrator came in the room and said, oh, well, I mean, you've lived in this unit for a long time. You're obviously not profitable to this landlord. Landlords don't want long-term tenants. And when your person who's supposed to be impartially deciding the dispute between you and your landlord starts off on that foot, I mean, that's very biased against tenants. And we need a more impartiality, and we need, tenant unions that are helping to reframe and push that narrative, and to like really set out housing is a human right. That means that profit motive comes second to housing people as human beings. When the profit takes the front seat, humanity loses every single time.
Okay, so one big issue with municipal elections is that the turnout is very low.
Mhm.
So how would you convince people out there, the voters of Vancouver, to vote? Not maybe not just for you, but vote at this election. Why is it important that voters turn up in big numbers at municipal level?
It's important because it's a tired saying, but the city is the closest level of government to people, and so they have the most direct impact on people's lives. But looking at it another way, let's look at it from what differentiates the city from other levels of government. What's the big key thing? And the city's biggest power is its ability to dramatically inflate the cost of land through the stroke of a pen. By changing rezoning, bam, the price of land goes way up. And then that creates speculation, that creates pressure, creates tons of profit motive, and that doesn't necessarily serve people's interests. So when you're talking, these are issues that don't come up because people don't know about them. When we're talking about, why does the city favor high-rise development? Why are they relying so much on private developers? It's because when they build those big buildings, they charge an amenity fee for every condo unit that gets built. And that amenity fee goes back into city coffers, and it helps to pay for building new amenities and maintaining existing amenities. So, parks, childcare, so on and so forth. But there are loopholes in how that process works so that landlords can build amenities into their building, or not landlords, developers can build amenities into their buildings so that they get the fee waived. And so they can put a pool in the building, they can put childcare in the building, and that's a gated amenity at that point. It only exists for the people in that building, but they're waived the fee. And so it creates one of several gentrification effects that we see around Vancouver. Amenities are getting built into private buildings, and that means that places where big buildings are not being built, neighborhoods like downtown East Side or Marpole, they're not getting the same level of amenities because they're gated. And one of the worst things is that building a couple floors of market rate rental is considered an amenity. And market rate rental is aimed at people who are earning more than $75,000 a year. So how is that an amenity? It just boggles my mind. I disagree with that completely. I think that we get people more engaged by educating people about these processes so they understand them better, and they're more likely to say, well, yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm going to start asking these people what they're going to do about it. So, if I'm elected, one of the things that I'd like to do is to have, put out educational videos about the process of being a city councilor and the things that are happening in the city that don't get a lot of attention. And you pretty much have to be a city planner or a huge city planning nerd to understand and like get interested in it. I want to make it accessible to the average person. I also want to find more ways to engage younger people in voting, in the electoral process, and in feeling like they're connected to their local government. Because young people are, they're not coming out to vote. I think it was 9% in the last election. That's really, really low numbers. As you may know, I support reducing the voting age to 16. I'd like to see the Vancouver Charter amended to allow that. And I'd like to look at other ways to ensure that young voices are heard in the city. And, that's going to take some consultation. We're going to have to talk to young people. We're going to have conversations. We're also going to have conversations with the rest of the city and find out, what are people comfortable with? I think it's always a good thing when we enfranchise more people to vote. That's why I also want to see the Vancouver Charter amended so that permanent residents who've lived in the city for enough time, we'll have to figure out what that is through consultation, but people who've lived here for a while, whether or not they're a Canadian citizen, it's their city too, and they should have a say in what's happening. By contrast, we should remove the right of absent property owners to vote in our city election. Somebody who owns a house here and rents it out and lives back in Ontario has the right to vote in our election. That's archaic. Okay, it should not be happening in this day and age. It makes no sense. It's just protecting, it's literally like right up with big in large letters, property ownership is more important than people. I just can't get behind it. So I think we do some of these things and we start to attack the problem of cynicism and defeatism and give people hope and a reason to want to vote.
Thank you so much, Breen. I know you've had a very busy campaign, and tomorrow is the big day.
Yeah.
And I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.